There is a subtle moment in life when you stop reaching out first, not as a decision, not as a statement, but as something that simply doesn't happen the way it used to. And if you look closely, it's not because you don't care. It's because something in you has grown tired of always being the one who does. If this feels quietly familiar, stay with this reflection, because what looks like distance on the surface is often something much deeper underneath. You may not remember exactly when it started. For years, you were the one who checked in, the one who called, who remembered dates, who asked how others were doing, sometimes without being asked in return. It wasn't a burden back then. It was just part of who you were. You maintained connections. You kept things alive. You made sure relationships didn't fade. And for a long time, you didn't question it. If this reflection touches something you've been noticing but haven't fully put into words, stay a little longer. Sometimes awareness arrives before understanding. Then gradually, something begins to shift. Not because others changed dramatically, but because you begin to notice patterns that were always there. You realize how often you are the one initiating. How many conversations would not happen unless you started them. How silence tends to last until you break it. At first, you dismiss it. People are busy. Life is complicated. Everyone has their own responsibilities. And all of that is true. But over time, repetition creates clarity. You begin to see that some connections are sustained by your effort more than by mutual intention. And that realization is quiet, but significant. You may test it without fully admitting that you are. You wait. You don't send the message this time. You don't make the call. You allow space to exist. And then nothing happens. Not immediately, not dramatically. Just a longer silence than you expected. And in that silence, something becomes clear. Not painful in a sharp way, but heavy in a slow, settling way. If you've ever experienced this, waiting just to see if someone else will step forward, and realizing they don't, pause here for a moment, because that moment changes something. There is also the way your expectations begin to adjust. You stop assuming that effort will be returned. You stop expecting the same level of attention, the same consistency, not out of bitterness, but out of recognition. You begin to understand people as they are, not as you hoped they would be. And that understanding, while grounding, can also create distance. Not because you want to pull away, but because you no longer feel the same impulse to reach. Another shift appears in how you interpret silence. Before, silence felt like something to fix. Now it feels like information. It tells you who notices your absence, who values your presence enough to seek it, and who has quietly grown used to you always being there, without needing to ask. This awareness changes how you move. You begin to invest less energy in chasing connection, not because connection doesn't matter, but because you start to value reciprocity more than continuity. A relationship that continues only because you sustain it begins to feel unbalanced, and over time, that imbalance becomes difficult to ignore. You may also notice a change in how you respond when people finally do reach out. There is still warmth and still care, but also a quiet distance, not intentional, just present, because something inside you remembers the silence that came before, and that memory shapes how deeply you re-engage. This is not about keeping score. It's about awareness. Awareness of patterns, of effort, of where energy flows and where it does not return. If you think back, perhaps to a specific relationship where you began to step back, where you chose not to initiate as often, notice what changed. Not just externally, but internally. There may have been a sense of loss, but also unexpectedly a sense of relief, because maintaining connection, especially one-sided connection, requires energy. And when that energy is no longer being spent, something else becomes available. Space, quiet, clarity. This is where many people feel conflicted, because part of you still cares, still remembers what the relationship once was, or what it could have been. But another part recognizes what it currently is, and holding both of those truths at the same time is not easy. You are not rejecting people. You are adjusting to reality, and that adjustment often looks like distance from the outside. But internally, it feels like alignment. You begin to understand that not all relationships are meant to remain at the same level of closeness. Some shift, some fade, some continue, but in a quieter, less demanding way. And forcing them to stay the same only creates strain, so instead you allow them to reveal themselves. Without constant effort, without constant maintenance, you let time and silence show you what is still there. This requires a different kind of strength. Not the strength of holding things together, but the strength of letting things be as they are, without interference, without correction, without chasing. And that is not easy for someone who has spent a lifetime maintaining connections, because reaching out, caring, initiating, that was part of your identity. Letting go of that, even partially, can feel like losing something important. But what you may begin to discover is this. You are not losing connection. You are changing how you relate to it. From effort to awareness, from maintenance to mutuality. From constant reaching to intentional presence. If you've reached this point, you may recognize a deeper realization forming. This shift is not about becoming distant. It is about becoming honest. Honest about who shows up. Honest about where your energy goes. Honest about what feels balanced and what does not. And honesty, especially after many years of giving, can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But it also creates something new. Self-respect. The kind that does not demand attention, but quietly chooses where attention is given. This is where your relationships begin to reorganize. Not through confrontation, not through declarations, but through subtle changes in behavior. You reach out less. You observe more. You invest where there is response. And where there is none, you allow space to remain. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop compensating. And that distinction matters. Because caring does not require constant action, but compensating does. As you continue forward, you may still feel moments of hesitation. Moments where you almost send the message, almost make the call, simply out of habit. And sometimes you will. Because change is not immediate. It is gradual. But over time, something stabilizes. You become comfortable with not always being the one who starts. Comfortable with letting silence exist. Comfortable with allowing relationships to show their natural shape. And in that comfort, there is a quiet form of peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is clear. The inner system. Thanks you for listening and being part of this reflection. And if there is one thing to carry with you from this moment, let it be this. You are not stopping because you no longer care. You are stopping because you've learned that real connection does not require you to be the only one reaching.